Hello, my name is Barry Boyce. I'm the founding editor of Mindful magazine and mindful.org. Welcome to the Mindful Healthcare Speaker Series, Resources for Challenging Times. These calls are brought to you through a collaboration of the Awake Network and mindful.org. Thanks so much for joining us. I'd like to jump right in and welcome our keynote speaker today, Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, who needs a little introduction. Suffice it to say that in establishing mindfulness-based stress reduction in 1979, he became a pioneer in bringing mindfulness to the largest number of people in the greatest number of contexts across the globe. And it all started in a hospital and was based on a public health view of mind-body practices. So John couldn't be a more appropriate or timely spokesperson for the power of mindfulness in difficult times. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Barry.
We're also delighted to have Dr. Rina Kotecha as our lead host. Rina is a physician based in London, UK, and the founder of Mindful Medics, the Healthcare Starts with Self-Care program that she leads around the world. Since the pandemic began, she has been conducting regular practice sessions on Zoom and is hearing from a wide range of providers about what's happening on the ground. We're very honored that she can be here to bring her broad experience and big heart into our series. Welcome, Rina.
Thanks, Barry.
Last thing before we get going, I wanted to say a few words about the structure of this call. John and Rina will be in conversation for about 30 minutes, during which time John will also lead us in a guided meditation. Then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A from those who are watching live on Zoom. Rina will give more instructions about how this will work when we get there. So thank you all again for joining us. We're really looking forward to this series. Without further ado, please take it away, Rina.
Thank you so much, Barry, for that warm introduction. And before we go into a dialogue with John, I just want to take a moment to welcome all of you who are joining us live on the call today. So I'm told that we have over 11,000 people who've signed up to the speaker series, many of whom are either watching this through Zoom or YouTube. And wherever you are in the world, a very warm welcome to you. A good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So I'd love to get an idea of who's in the space. So I invite you to share in the chat section or the comment section who you are, what your role is, maybe your specialty within healthcare, where you're from, and really hope to get a sense of the global healthcare community on this call today. With that, I would like to welcome John. Dr. Kabat-Zinn, what can I say? It's such an honor and a privilege to have you here today. For healthcare professionals across the globe to be spoken to by yourself, to have the insights and the wisdom that you can offer us, particularly during this time. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much. It's
yeah, John,
to be here.
And it's wonderful to have you. And John, what I want to, I guess how I want to start is by saying that, yes, that, you know, we're currently in a pandemic, right? It's a difficult situation. There are challenges across the board. We're in unprecedented times. And yet somehow that seems somewhat of an understatement when we consider what healthcare professionals are having to go through, given the current landscape and how it's unfolding. So having worked as an emergency doctor myself previously, I know it's hard at the best of times. And now over the past few months, we've been finding that we're in a uniquely intense situation. There are so many complexities that it's hard to name all of them, but I'd like to highlight a few. So for example, we have Rebecca. Rebecca's a 33-year-old nurse. She ordinarily lives with her mother. Her mother is a cancer patient and therefore in a high-risk group. Now, for Rebecca, she made the decision of moving out of home into a hotel for 3 months so that she could A, protect her mother, and B, continue to serve and support as a nurse on the front line. We have Andrew, the recently qualified junior doctor who is out there on the ward. Andrew comes home emotionally distressed most days because he's having to tell the loved ones of dying COVID patients that they must say their goodbyes over FaceTime. We have healthcare professionals across the board going into work day in, day out, fearing for their own safety and the safety of their co-workers, and along with this, grieving the loss of their patients and colleagues. And then there are those healthcare providers and healthcare workers who are not necessarily working on the front line, but doing the best they can with the resources they have to adapt their practices and services and provide the best possible care at this time. So what we're seeing here is a whole range of human emotion that these individuals are having to go through, that our colleagues are having to go through: fear, anxiety, grief, guilt. There's a huge sense of guilt, a sense of, I wish I could do more, and moral distress in making key day-to-day decisions. And now we're in a situation where things are changing, things are shifting, right? As we come out of lockdown, or as lockdown begins to ease somewhat in many countries. So with so much to contend with here, John, I'm curious to get and to explore with you your wider perspective, your bigger perspective in where we're at and how we might navigate this situation. I've previously heard you talk about taking refuge through the cultivation of mindfulness and heartfulness. And I'd love to explore that a bit, but also highlight that when I've been delivering my mindful medic sessions, speaking to a whole range of doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals who might not necessarily be familiar with mindfulness as a practice, one of the questions I often get asked is, Irina, you're asking us to come into the here and now. Well, the here and now is a pandemic. It's a crisis situation. So I'd love you to address that as well, if you may, John.
Well, thank you for that extremely eloquent and elegant and also deeply moving and disturbing thumbnail sketch of the heartbreaking horror of the conditions we find ourselves under, and in particular, those who are absolutely on the front lines in one way or another of caring for people who, succumb to the virus, who come down with the virus in all the various ways that people were trained to do. And then, of course, nobody really gets the kind of training that you need for something like this. So I've been reading in the papers because, of course, I may be a professor of medicine, but I am not an MD, and I want to make that very clear that I have not gone through that kind of training, although I have taught medical students for a very long time. And what I teach them is to not lose their humanity in the sort of process of becoming a doctor. And very often, people can lose or sort of misplace their original motivations for doing this, which are usually extremely selfless and positive and wanting to really be of use in the world. And I have like hundreds of friends who are physicians, many of whom are on the front lines of this, and many of whom aren't and have their own kind of challenges that they're facing because they were not trained for this kind of thing. They just do like brain surgery or heart surgery and stuff like that. And it's like, they're not that much more useful than I would be in the, on the wards at this particular moment in time. So there's all sorts of complexities because we're at a moment when nobody really knows. I mean, it's been 100 years since we've had this kind of a pandemic, and nobody really knows how to approach it. And of course, leadership has been sorely lacking in different countries in different ways. So very often, what would have saved a lot of lives as the exponential curve was rising, which we had the capacity to do, somehow just couldn't get operationalized. So it's a very complex situation into which you throw I hate to use this analogy, but since you brought it up as a war kind of situation, you throw the frontline, troops who are ill prepared, even when it comes to masks and gowns and protective equipment and stuff like that, and who
Oh, I think we've lost John for just a moment, so we'll just wait for him to come back on. Of course, technology can sometimes play games with us. So
did you lose me?
we did, John, but it was perhaps a good time to take a pause. So
Did you lose the sound as well as the picture?
just the sound.
Oh, just the sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what I can do about that. I'm on the Ethernet and, you know, and not on wireless. And
No, I
think,
was just saying, actually, it's possibly a good time to take a pause
yeah,
as and allow what you're saying to sort of settle, because it is the reality that we are in a sort of war zone type situation, you know, lots of references to war, and also not resourced in the way that perhaps.
well, that was the basic point that I was making. And so, again, your point of like, aside from our various trainings that can only take us so far, how do we actually deal with this kind of environment and the fears that we, you know, inevitably face for our own mortality, or for the bringing the virus home to our own loved ones, or just the overwhelm of seeing people die under the circumstances where they can't have their loved ones available and they have to do it over FaceTime or something like that. And it's like, and everybody's in masks and gowns. So, you know, it's like, that's how people are leaving this life. And there's something about it that is absolutely heart-wrenching. And there's no quick fixes here. It's not like, oh, just be a little bit more mindful and you won't feel the stress of this kind of thing. Oh, if you're not feeling the stress of this, you're not human. This is what Zorba the Greek called the full catastrophe of the human condition. And it's not entirely a catastrophe. There's also the beauty. There's the rescuing people. There's the actual people getting off the ventilators. There's one triumphant story after another, even as the bodies are piling up and not even able to be buried in certain circumstances, like in New York City during the height of it. So this is where mindfulness really comes in. And please know, if you don't know anything about mindfulness, that this is not some kind of advertisements for some gimmick that all you need to do is meditate and your life will just be infinitely better, and your stress and PTSD from these kinds of conditions will magically evaporate because you really weren't doing it right in the first place. There's nothing to do with meditation as we speak about it. In fact, the real meditation is not sitting like a statue in the British Museum, since you happen to be in London or any place else, and pretending that you're beyond it all or able to transcend it all. The real meditation practice is how we live our lives moment by moment by moment, whatever is arising, and underscore whatever. Okay, so that can be romanticized to sound like it's kind of samurai mind or using war analogies or something like that, but it's really not. What it is it's actually cultivating aspects of our humanity that until very recently we weren't trained in school. Now in the UK, you've got you know, mindfulness in schools and all sorts of programs, many of them out of the Oxford University Mindfulness Center, that are actually learning how and studying the effects of training young people in mindfulness in terms of cultivating a greater robust capacity to maintain balance under the most difficult of circumstances. So the real meditation practice is learning how to drop in on the entirety of what's going on without trying to idealize how you should be in relationship to it, but to just not, in some sense, to recognize how easily we can build a story around it, especially horrible stories because it's so horrible, and then forget the beauty that's also unfolding at the very same time. And also because the virus hits the lungs, so, and the whole sort of respiratory tract so in such a primary way, to actually recognize that if you don't have the virus, I mean, the miracle of breathing is phenomenal, and the physiology of breathing and the molecular biology and genetics and epigenetics of breathing is insanely complex and beautiful. And yet we can take a breath effortlessly and we don't have to think about it, and we don't have to breathe, even though we think we're the ones who are doing the breathing, which we're not. So very often it's incredibly helpful to anchor your attention on some aspect of reality while the proverbial stuff is hitting the proverbial fan in the outer world and in your mind and your ways of interpreting it moment by moment by moment. So that's a skill that you can actually develop by exercising the muscle of attention and where your attention alights. And especially when you're feeling the enormous traumatic effects of what you're in the middle of, is very helpful to actually also touch base with some element of it that's already okay in you, that's already reliable, that's already healthy. And that would be your capacity to pay attention and be in the present moment without reactivity, or noticing how much you're being reactive and not react to that. And it turns out that gives you a kind of, one of my patients decades ago said, an extra driver in my golf club bag. But it gives you basically another dimension of experience in which to reside while the proverbial stuff is hitting the proverbial fan. It doesn't reduce the enormity and the heartbreak of the moment, but it gives you a way to be in wiser relationship to it that can cultivate both compassion and equanimity for yourself as well as for others in no time. And while that sounds like, pie in the sky in a certain way, when you actually practice it, when you try it, even once, you're here already, and you are not the enormity of the trauma. You are bigger than even the trauma and the medical challenges that are being faced at the moment, or the social challenges in the hospital, in a way that just gives you an extra dimension of balance, almost like the stabilizing fins on a submarine that otherwise would just sort of twirl around in the water. But even a tiny little bit of stability in those moments can be incredibly helpful. And that's a muscle. That's something you can actually exercise. You can work with your own mind's inflammatory reactivity and be aware that you are not that inflammation. You are not that, traumatic stuff. It's all true and it's all happening. And there's this extra place that you're not escaping to, but that can actually maintain moment to moment awareness and equilibrium in a way that is absolutely required for you to do your job. And then when you go home, there is obviously some kind of a enormous letdown. And of course, especially if you can't go home and you have to go to a hotel and be by yourself, and there's nobody you can tell about this, plus you've lost colleagues. So it boils down to the question of, what does it mean to actually be a human being? Never mind a physician or a nurse or a frontline worker. What does it mean to be me?
I think that's so appropriate at a time like this, where we're all dealing with sort of the complexities of humanity, at this time. And I completely resonate with your point. Many of us were going through medical school or nursing school or, sort of training, our training, were often told to look after our patients, which of course is important. But what I'm sensing here is that we also need to cultivate an awareness of ourselves and somehow bring that common humanity and compassion to ourselves, so that we can better navigate the situation and we're better able to look after our patients.
Precisely. And it turns out there's no contradiction between the two. It's not either or, because life is one seamless whole. And that includes your own mind, heart, feelings, reactions, emotions of all kinds, and your body. And it all can be, in some sense, taken care of just by embracing it in awareness. Now that sounds crazy until you try it. And it doesn't require any extra anything, because we're all born with this awareness, but we're never taught how to make use of it or how to access it when we most need it. So it's an intelligence that's even more powerful than thought, because it can hold any thought or any emotion, no matter how scary, no matter how brilliant, or no matter how toxic, in awareness. And then you realize your awareness is not the actual content of the thought or the emotion. Therefore, you have that extra dimension of freedom, a kind of a new degree of freedom in which to choose to be in a different kind of relationship with it. And some of it, of course, means you choose to just let it be for the moment, put it on hold. You cannot metabolize the levels of trauma that we're facing every single day. That will happen later, and there will be a letdown, and there may be post-traumatic stress and depression and everything else. But even that is workable as long as you're willing to do what I used to call a certain kind of work, but now I would say is more like a certain kind of love, where you embrace yourself in a way that allows you to feel and know everything that is arising within you, some of which you're not going to like, other of which you are not going to be familiar to you, because we never give ourselves enough love, or ourselves enough kind of non-narcissistic recognition for our own beauty. And when we can do that with ourselves, we can do it for each other in a much more authentic way, embodied way. And since the frontline workers are all part of a team, it's not like, simply individuals, then we help each other by reminding each other. And I would say also rebodying each other moment by moment, not just by putting on new equipment, but by remembering I'm in this body in this moment, and I can be aware of the other bodies around me. And then that creates a larger sense of togetherness in terms of purpose and the vector of what we need to get through before our shift ends, and to come out and, then let down. I mean, cry in the car. I mean, we're reading all these things, like people can't even drive home. I mean, they're just like sobbing with everything that they've taken in during the day or been unable to deal with, and then maybe not sleep, and then maybe go back into the freight the next day. So I just want to say that this is like, this is not a sense of in any way minimizing the enormity of what everybody's working with, but in some sense, because we can't do anything about it in the moment, putting out the welcome mat for it and discovering that there's another kind of dimension that we can tap in ourselves that will help us to ultimately recover from the trauma of it all and suffer with, which means to carry. The root of the word suffer means to carry all of the faces and the stories and the losses that are an inevitable part of this, and still recognize that life is beautiful, and that as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you, as we tell our chronic medical patients for 40 years. And that turns out to be profoundly transformative, more than healing. So it's very important to be in it for the long haul, and yet at the same time, paradoxically, stay in the present moment. It's unless you practice it, unless you actually instantiate it by trying to just keep coming back every time you lose your mind, come back, because we can't afford to lose our minds in these kinds of moments. What you're doing is actually befriending your mind in ways that, 25 years of enormous research, much of it extremely credible and published in high-profile journals, suggesting that this what looks so much like non-doing, just being quiet, being still inwardly, even if there's a lot of activity outwardly, actually transforms your brain structure as well as function, drives neuroplasticity and what's called functional connectivity in the brain, regulates emotions, attention, everything else. All that happens just by mind goes off, you bring it back. Mind goes off, you bring it back. You keep reminding yourself that you're here. and that you are not your narrative, no matter how heavy duty and horrible your narrative may be at this point. You're just bigger than it, no matter how big and horrible and emotionally rending it is.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that. And what the image that I'm getting here is you know, sort of sitting back and being a witness and witnessing.
Although I would never use that word, just to,
Okay.
because it's so easy to misunderstand what I'm saying. So as soon as you think of yourself as a witness, you've turned yourself into a noun. And this
Okay.
is much more like a verb. It's so that there's no you doing it, because then
Mhm.
you create a meditator, you create another story about me now being more robust because I can handle stuff because I've trained in mindfulness. It's all nonsense. It's just another story. What I'm talking about is something that's immediately accessible by attending. So let's throw out the word witness or even witnessing, the
Mhm.
present participle, but let's stay with attending, because that's what, in the US at least, we call physicians who make rounds in the hospital. They are called attendings.
Yes.
But they're never really trained, unless they go through a mindfulness program, in how to attend,
Mhm.
and to attend outwardly and inwardly, so that, you know, there's no separation between inner and outer, or me and you in some larger sense. And then you see medicine and meditation, their words sound alike because they're linked at the etymological hip. And so it's not that far-fetched to actually bring heavy duty, intensive meditation training into your life. And in fact, the pandemic is a wake-up call. So it is actually training us in meditation, whether we know it or not. But when you avail yourselves of even, you know, the encapsulated forms that this series of speakers will be offering, it resonates with what's already resident in your own heart, and therefore instantaneous recognition that you don't have to become a good meditator to take care of yourself in this way, or to deal with the full catastrophe of what you're facing. It's almost like intuitively apparent that it's possible, as long as you are willing to be in the present moment, moment by moment by moment by moment. So you don't have to worry about the future. The past is over, no matter how horrible it's been. And when you stay in this moment, or, you know, some people in sports would call it the zone, but it's like the present moment, then you can, in some sense, give without becoming depleted, or recover more completely when you do inevitably become depleted, because you're not taking it as personally as you do. Now, this sounds insane when your patients are dying, and maybe your parents are dying, or maybe, you know, so it's like, it's very hard to talk about this in a way that actually brings the kind of power of what we would call, technically speaking, non-duality, that there's no separation between subject and object, me and you, medicine and meditation, health and illness. And then when we work in that kind of a way, again, it has healing and transformative elements that are available instantly. It's not like you have to go to some monastery in Asia and meditate for 20 years, and then maybe you'll be capable of being mindful.
Mm. And with that, John, I would love for you to guide us through a sort of a short 5-10 minute meditation, so that
Yeah.
we can really start to experience, have an experience of much of what you're talking about.
Okay. And you could do this in your car. You could do this, you know, in the bathroom in the hospital. I mean, you can do it anywhere. You can sort of take refuge. And the word refuge is really important, because in a sense, we're all refugees. There's an enormous refugee problem on the planet, you know, never mind the COVID epidemic. I mean, we're dealing with so many pandemics of various kinds, including global warming. So to take refuge simply means to get out of the wind for a moment, because the wind's not going to stop. But when you can take refuge and get out of the wind, then you can recalibrate, recover, respond instead of react, and then go back into the winds and do what you need to do your job, they say, or whatever it is. But to do it with a sense of greater connectivity to a larger whole, which may be all the rest of the folks on the team that are, also making the same kinds of life choices that I'm making that put my own life at risk. There's no question about that. So in this moment, or whenever you find this video, taking a moment to just establish yourself in a posture that embodies wakefulness and dignity. And it could be lying down on the floor. And sometimes, after a horrific day, just lying down is the absolute best way, not to fall asleep, but actually to fall awake and to let some of the stuff that's happened to us during the day just sort of flow through us, flush through us. You might even say, crash over us like a wave and dissipate. And as we do, whether you're sitting or standing, with your eyes either open or closed, whatever feels comfortable to you, just dropping in on a sense of your body as a whole in this moment, however it is. Almost feeling the entire envelope of your skin as if it were breathing. And maybe feeling whatever sensations in the body let you know that the body itself is breathing and it doesn't need you to help out. It's extremely well taken care of by a combination of the brainstem and the diaphragm and the phrenic nerve. And we can actually ride on the waves of our breathing or surf on the waves of the breath. We're not thinking about the breath. We're actually being bathed by this in-breath and this out-breath. And noticing what's carried away with each out-breath. And if there's stuff that wants to release in you right in this moment, just not try to force it out or release anything, but just notice if the exhalation doesn't intrinsically dispel certain elements of stress and tension and grief, and not getting rid of anything, but it's simply letting things be as they are in this moment. And each in-breath, of course, is like a new beginning. And we need every single one of these breaths. We're not interested in the last breath. It's only this in-breath that's important. And if you pay attention long enough to your breathing, you'll actually come to recognize that every single breath you take is different. So just like the Inuit people of the far north have like many scores of words, different words for snow. There are an unimaginable number of breaths, each one unique. And we don't care about that. All we care about is this unique breath coming in and leaving the body. And notice that we can actually come to rest in the embracing of our own breath. That everything else that's concerned, that we're concerned with, can to some degree sort of be left in the wings for a moment. And the breath is occupying center stage in the field of our awareness. We're not shutting anything out, but we're featuring the breath sensations in the belly, in the chest, at the nostrils, wherever they are most vivid and predominant for you. But I suggest actually training to befriend the belly, because it's as far away from the head as you can get and still feel the breath sensations. And the head, of course, is the carrier of a lot of our distress in the form of thoughts and emotions. We're not trying to shut any of that out, but we're simply featuring some other aspect of life unfolding in this very moment. and taking up residency in your awareness as if your life depended on it. Sheltering in this timeless present moment we call now, which is infinitely portable. So you're befriending silence. You're befriending stillness. You're befriending moments of wakefulness. Even as the mind may be doing whatever it is doing, and even as the body may be carrying enormous amounts of tension and stress and contraction and grief. We're not shutting any of that out again. We're just simply resting out of the wind. And riding on the waves of our own breath with full awareness, moment by moment by moment. And I often suggest, not in these kinds of, sort of crisis conditions, but it's applicable here too, to practice this for the moments that you are practicing it as if your life depended on it. And of course, your life depends on the next in-breath, but your life depends perhaps in a different way, but equally importantly, on how you are in relationship to this breath in this moment. Because the breath reminds us of the moment, reminds us that we're only here now, only here for now, and that we have a range of different ways in which we might be in relationship to the full catastrophe of the human condition as we are experiencing it in any particular moment. But since this is the only moment really, in this particular moment. And then for those of you who are brand new to this practice, you'll notice after a very short period of time that your mind is not going to necessarily cooperate with your decision to just ride on the waves of your own breathing or surf on the, physical sensations of breathing, the in-breath and the out-breath. It's going to take off and it's going to go back to the hospital or to the last patient or to home or to anything at all. And after a while, you realize that, oh, wait a minute, I gave myself the assignment to just stay in the belly, to just stay with this breath, to just see if I couldn't be at home in this moment as it is. And then, of course, as soon as you notice your mind's not on your breath, then you're back in awareness. And it's not the breath that was important anyway. It's the awarenessing, the attending. And so here we are again. And so it's an unbelievably forgiving and reliable practice because every in-breath is a new beginning. You can always begin again. How am I going to be in wise, fully embodied, open-hearted relationship to this moment in the midst of like one disaster after another? And even as we encounter the disasters and we cry and we bleed for the losses and the insanity of it all and the incompetence sometimes of, just not having what we need to do this in the best possible way. Even in those moments, such rending moments, we're not forgetting the other face of life, the beauty, the love, that is evident in every aspect of the hospital, of our coworkers, of the patients, of their families, of the administration of everything when it comes right down to it, and of the entire world, that the beauty hasn't taken a vacation. It's here too. And it's in you now. And so we come back to the breath when the mind wanders, and we come back to the present moment and to a certain kind of perspective and equanimity that doesn't deny the horror, but in fact is made wiser by opening to the full range of what is being experienced and learning from it and adapting to it in ways that will ultimately transform medicine and epidemiology and public health in this country and in the world. Not fast enough for sure, but still that will happen. And when the world has the pandemic more or less in the rearview mirror, things will all come out of this differently. We are being shaped by something that no one asked for and nobody wanted. But can we acquire tools and practices and skills and wisdom and tap into our intrinsic compassion and integrity and ethical behavior so that we can actually help this sorry world to heal? A medicine that's not necessarily just limited to the individual patients that we treat, but a medicine for all of the various ways in which our societies are broken or creating unnecessarily violence and division and separation and disregard and racism and baked in legal injustices and economic inequality of enormous disproportion. So, we're in a very, very big context here. From the very, very small to the very, very large. And the very, very small is enormous and huge, as well as the very, very large. Our education has not taken us far enough, but of course, it's not over for us yet. So in some sense, the curriculum is whatever is arising. The curriculum of life and growing into ourselves as human beings is whatever is arising in this moment. And is our mind and is our heart big enough to hold it all? Well, play with it and see what happens. There are very few alternatives that are as, in my mind, at least in my experience, as healthy and as innovative and as creative and as imaginative as learning how to be in wise relationship with the full catastrophe, if you will, of the human condition. And there's a lot of evidence supporting what I just said. But all of that is meaningless. The most important evidence is only accrued in the laboratory of life unfolding, moment by moment by moment. And ultimately, every single one of us needs to take responsibility for our own little piece of it. And then, since we don't end at the boundary of our skin, stay in deep connection with each other, because we need each other. We breathe the same air. We feel the same pain. We mourn the same losses. And we survive and thrive and learn and grow and heal and ultimately transform our own nature and grow into perhaps what it fully means for each one of us uniquely to be here on this planet and to be human and to love what needs loving, including ourselves. So sometimes in meditation, guided meditations, we might ring bells at the end to signify that, oh, the meditation's over now. I'm not going to ring any bells. I didn't ring any bells to begin with, because I want to emphasize what I'd said earlier, and that is there's no beginning to this meditation practice. There's no end to this meditation practice. It's completely congruent and coexistent with life itself. And whether we can remember that or not, the opportunity is always available in every single moment to be who we already are and let the heart actually hold things in ways that go way beyond the intellect. And check and see if that's reliable practice for you. And if it isn't, try something else. I mean, you can do this running, you can do this at the gym, you can do, of course you can't go to the gym, but you can do, I mean, it's not a doing, it's a being. But when our doing comes out of this domain of being, it's an entirely different doing. And I'll end by simply saying, you know, being of the age that I am, and having met Buckminster Fuller when I was young and being very impressed with the inventor of the geodesic dome and all sorts of other crazy things that he did, which were such a kind of amazing, you know, Buckminster Fuller wrote a book that I think is called Spaceship Earth, way back when they'd just gotten to the moon and looked back and saw that this was one small home that we had in the midst of like infinitely dark, vast space. And there were no lines on it saying US, you know, Europe, Italy, Canada, South America. There were no labels. It's all one piece. And this is a moment where we need all hands on Spaceship Earth. There's no question about it. Even if we hadn't had this pandemic, which you know, people who thought about this knew it was coming for a very long time. It was only a matter of time. And there will be more. And they've happened in Shakespeare's time and in Newton's time and in, you know, all sorts of different times. And they were horrible and we had no idea what they were. Now, at least we have, you know, science that can actually begin to understand how a tiny little strand of RNA with a little bit of protein sort of and lipid coat can actually get inside our body and do stuff. And it's not even personal. It doesn't know that we're humans. It doesn't care. I mean, it doesn't care about your politics or your anything, even your age, apparently. So this is really a time for us to wake up collectively and have all hands on deck. And that means there's no one right way to meditate. There's no one right way to be who you already are. Find the way that works for you. But for God's sake, don't forget yourself in this process. Don't inflate yourself into some narrative because it's never true enough. But remember your own beauty. And then the meditation practice, just like medicine, at its depth, it's a love affair. It's a love affair with life and with everything beautiful about what it means to be human and what it means to be alive and what it means to be on this planet. And I love that. And I feel like we're going to see this through. And we don't know how many more people are going to die before that. And then, of course, we're all going to die at some point. So the question is, and I don't mean this to be flippant in any way, shape, or form, but the question is, can we be fully alive before we die? Okay, and not on autopilot, zone along on autopilot for a lot of our life and have all sorts of explanations why we missed it all and then drop into our graves. No, the important thing is to wake up now. And our philosopher from the 19th century, Henry David Thoreau, is famous for having said, I went to the woods, he went off to the woods and lived for 2 years in the woods by Lake Walden Pond. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what they had to teach. Boy, is that happening in this pandemic. And not when I came to die, discover that I hadn't lived. That's the size of the cloth here.
Yeah, it really is. And I think what you've done there, John, is really give us that almost cosmic perspective on where we're at and the enormity of both what we're experiencing as individuals, but also collectively. And really what I'm sort of taking away from that practice, or as we were going through the practice, what emerged for me was this divinity of each moment. And given that this is a respiratory illness, I think there's something beautiful about that, where we can access our own breath and serve others to have more of theirs, you know, and to live more fully. And so thank you so much. I certainly feel a lot more sort of grounded through that and more stable. And I hope, I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone here on the call who's just gone through that, is if we can carry that through in the moment as we segue through our day in whatever capacity we're working in, I know and believe that it will serve us, our co-workers and our patients well. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I should just say that you don't have to be good at this. Like, you know, everybody who's doing anything in medicine is, you know, sort of probably too hard on themselves. You know, they're sort of like really great at performing under various circumstances, including learning. This really is an invitation to get out of our own way and not be stuck in a certain kind of acquisitional mode that learners often get stuck in, and educators too. So that there's no one right way to actually engage in this practice. And it's not a doing, it's a being. So and you can't do it wrong. As the thought might come up, I must not be doing it right because I'm not having any good feelings. Well, who knows that? Who is aware of you not having any good feelings? And then, is that even true?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just back to your point, if this breath is still coming into your body, don't you have a good feeling about that? I mean, what maybe that might be a new opening for you to realize I don't have to have some kind of, you know, fireworks go off in order to feel like I'm okay in this moment. And that's a kind of miracle. It's a gift, and it's a love affair with life that's not self-centered or self-serving. And that is incredibly energizing, and it does metabolize trauma. It will metabolize trauma, not by pretending it's not traumatic, but quite the opposite, by widening the heart so that it can hold even the most horrible things without destroying us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And John, I do have one more question for you before we open out to the audience. So I'll just share some instructions with the audience. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, we're going to open up in about 5 minutes or so to take a couple of live questions. So if you're happy to come online, have your audio and your video switched on and ask Dr. Kabat-Zinn a question, then I invite you to share your question in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So start with the word live, L-I-V-E. Tell us who you are. So write your name, where you're from, and your medical specialty or your healthcare specialty, and then your question. And then,
Rena, would it be all right to simply say that we're not wedded to stopping exactly on the hour, so that there will be more time for this. I'm certainly fine with that. So it's just so that people don't get anxious about thinking this is going to end in 60 minutes, you know, at a total of 60
Sure.
minutes.
And thank you for offering that opportunity to be in conversation with you for this length of time, John. And yes, we're not sort of, you know, pushing for time, but I just want to make sure that you all have the time to write down your questions and chime them in the Q&A bar at the bottom of your screen. And if your question is chosen, we'll be sort of bringing you online. So please be on standby for that. So John, my final question to you, I mean, I have lots of questions, but one that I really wanted to explore for the next few moments is, and you've touched upon this so beautifully, is that despite this being a challenging situation, we're in a pandemic, we have seen countless acts of compassion, connection, collaboration, bravery and courage. We're seeing retired healthcare workers going back to serve at this time. We've been seeing charities and local businesses stepping in to deliver scrubs and masks and food to hospitals and key workers. We've seen an appreciation from the lay public like never before, you know, an appreciation
for the NHS.
Yes, and you know, across the board, clapping for our carers,
Right.
you know, and so traditionally there's that metaphor in mindfulness practice about the lotus rising out of the mud. And I would love for you to share, what is your glimmer of hope and possibility and light as we emerge out of this? And what do we need to do, or perhaps it's more apt to say, how do we need to be to co-create a better world as we come out of this and go forward?
Well, I'm not on the front line, so I'm not seeing this every single day, except by reading it in the newspapers and you know, watching the news from time to time. And you know, it's incredibly heartbreaking, and it's also incredibly inspiring at the same time. Mindfulness is really all about waking up. I mean, pure and simple, waking up to what we don't know, we don't know. In that way, it's not that different from science, because, you know, people don't like science, and there are a lot of people that are against the truth, so to speak, or you make up your own truth, whatever it is. But I'm not, you know, of that ilk. I mean, I really value truth, both artistic truth as well as scientific truth. So they're very different kinds of truth, but they have some degree of authenticity, and they are measurable in a certain way that is reliable and affect outcome in that way. So I'm enormously inspired by how people are actually responding in my country in the absence of a kind of overriding leadership that's not coming from, you know, the top in my country, that people are just kind of doing the best they can and then transcending the limitations of the moment to actually save people's lives and to grieve the ones that were not possible to save for reasons that often have to do with not with medicine, but just with supply chains and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm very, I remember Thich Nhat Hanh once saying, Thich Nhat Hanh is a Vietnamese Buddhist monk and meditation teacher who's now, I think, in the sort of end stages of his life. But he, back in the time of the Vietnam War, when the United States was bombing the hell out of a city called Hue, and he was on the ground there as a monk in his monastery, burying his fellow monks and nuns who were killed by the bombings. And as they were carrying the bodies to the charnel grounds, Thich Nhat Hanh would remind them, you know, with all the grief on their shoulders of the bodies of their fellow, you know, sort of humans, don't forget to see the flowers blooming by the side of the road. And I think that's emblematical of something that is, sort of universal. It doesn't have to do with Buddhism. It has to do with being human, that we have to remember the beauty, and we have to remember that that beauty is not some kind of abstraction out there or in some museum. It's in our humanity. It's woven into our genes, into our genome, into our flesh and bones. And without romanticizing that, the world needs every single one of its flowers, and every single one of us is one. And of course, it needs as little delusion and as much clarity and respect for truth and evidence as possible. And what floats my boat these days is that I think that the preponderance of the evidence is that most people get that, and they are not going to be swayed by demagoguery. And I hope that's true, because in the case of our children and our grandchildren and generations to come, if we don't take care of what needs taking care of now, that's like right in our faces because of the pandemic and everything else that we're facing, and heal the planet, do medicine, not just for individual people, but for the entire planet, so that we optimize well-being and minimize intrinsic disease and harm and dis-ease, then we're not being responsible to future generations. And, that will have its consequences that I don't want my mind to go anywhere near. So that's why I'm doing what I can with the years remaining in my life to actually just put your finger in the dike and my oar in the water, so to speak. And I take enormous hope from the fact that this is happening over and over and over again throughout the world by people who never heard the word mindfulness, couldn't spell the word mindfulness, don't care about mindfulness, are not meditators, but they are exemplary of everything that humanity is and why we value it so much and want to bring people back from the jaws of death in the first place, because there's something about life that's so beyond words and understanding and mystery. And there's a certain element of beauty and goodness and love to it that is worth saving, not just in individuals, but for future generations.
Thank you so much. And I had a tear naturally come to my eye when you shared about Thich Nhat Hanh and, talking about the flowers, or sort of reminding us to sort of observe and smell the flowers on our side of the path, despite what's happening. And I really hope that everyone on this call, as a sort of key takeaway, will take a moment after this call to really reflect on that. Despite the challenges and the difficulties, there is so much goodness that we're seeing emerging from this. And what can we do to take responsibility, to savor the goodness, to be part of it, and leave some of that goodness for our generations to come. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah.
And John, what I want to do is take a question now, if that's okay. We've got Maureen. Maureen's a nurse that is going to come online. So Maureen, just want to make sure that you're ready to come online and ask John your question. So we'll wait for her to come online. And as she does that, John, for me, there's something about what you said with regards to taking refuge and using that refuge or that space to respond rather than react. And there's a lot of triggers in today's world. And I can see how anchoring in the moment can help us respond. So thank you again for that. Yeah. Maureen, we see that you're live with us. Welcome. Hi.
Hi. I can't believe you picked my question.
Yeah.
Hi, hi.
Maureen, please tell us who you are and where you're from, and then feel free to ask your question.
Okay, so my name's Maureen, and I'm not working with COVID. I work as a nurse, seeing patients that are on coagulants, on blood thinners. So I'm not in the front lines like in New York. I'm in Maine, which is more rural. but I think my question is, just being a nurse for like 40 years, John, it sounds so easy to be mindful, but when a lot of things is happening at work, it's just hard to just get there. And I
There's
know
no
you're kind
there to get. That's the problem. Is that really, I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but this is a different kind of learning than what we've been conditioned to learn in school,
yeah,
which is that we have to perform and get somewhere else, and then we'll be recognized for being smart or whatever. So this is a kind of different angle in on human intelligence. So you're already okay. It's not like you have to get more okay, or that you could possibly even be more okay. Tomorrow you'll just be older, but you won't be any more okay than you are right in this moment. So the question is it possible for us to just realize that, in this moment, that we're already whole, already complete, and that there's no place to go, nothing to do, and no special something to attain. So this is so un-American, because you're American, I'll say it that way,
yeah,
because we're go-getters. We always want the result. As long as you're attached to a result, you could meditate until you're blue in the face and it will never deliver anything for you, because what you're looking for, you already have. So there's a certain kind of paradox to this. So you don't have to be good at it. All you need to do is get out of your own way, which means noticing how often we get in our own way by being attached to some outcome, as opposed to,
right.
like, there you are sitting in your chair right now, and you're breathing, and you're copacetic, you're called, and you're voicing a question. What's
Yeah.
missing?
See, nothing feels missing now, but it feels like when I'm at work and I need to make a decision about a patient's INR or what to do with them. And when I feel like I can't make that decision and something else is happening, it feels like overwhelming. And I get the importance of, yeah, I'm okay, but I'm not feeling okay right maybe in that minute.
No, you don't have to even feel okay. But the part of you is aware that you're not okay. And also part of you is aware that you have to make a decision, right?
Yeah,
And now where does that decision actually come from?
here
Are you sure?
and here. Well, here, I think, yeah.
Okay, well, look, there you go. You've already answered your own question. If you trust that it comes from multiple places, let's say within yourself, so you don't want to lose your head or your mind, but you also don't want to forget the heart, because it has a different form of intelligence.
Hmm.
Pascal, a famous, genius of the 17th century in France, said, the heart has ways that the mind will never understand. It has its own forms of intelligence. So when you listen to the whole of your own, instinct and knowledge, you pretty much make the right decision every time. If you get into, on the one hand, on the other hand, and you just get caught in thinking, very often you'll make a decision out of fear.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Probably not the right decision if you're making it out of fear.
No.
So the basic message is you're already okay. You're already trustworthy if you're willing to really listen deeply to the full dimensionality of your multiple wisdom intelligences. What do you have
Right.
to lose?
So when I go back to work in a day and I'm in that whatever, just
Just
work.
come back to your breath, come back to
Mhm,
the body, take a moment. You don't have to sit down or do anything dramatic, but to
mhm.
just realize, okay, there's a branch point here. I could go the way of reaction, or I could go the way of responding. Which is more appropriate? Listening to the full range of instincts around decision making, or go with the same old. And whichever direction you choose, you'll learn from it, and it'll probably be right in that moment. And then the next time you'll have another option, and every moment's different anyway, and every decision's different. So it's not like there's a script to this, but it really means that you have to trust your own trustworthiness.
Mm.
And then, of course, consult with colleagues around difficult issues, of course.
Of course.
So it's not an either or situation. And that's why I didn't ring any bells, that it's like the meditation practice includes consulting with colleagues. It includes thinking your best thoughts, but it also includes knowing there are limits to thinking, especially
Yes.
when we're frightened, especially
Mm.
when we're frightened. Does that help at all?
Yes, John. And thank you so much. I really
Okay, so you have your homework cut out for tomorrow when you go back to work.
Yes, thank you.
Let
Yeah.
us know how it goes. Send in a note.
Okay. Through here.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process. This is not a one-off. This
Yeah.
is
I
for
get that.
life. It's for
Yeah.
life.
Right.
Maureen, do let us know how it goes. And again, just remember that there's, like John said, there's nothing to get and nowhere to get. And I think accessing that deep wisdom while seeing your patients, I think will be something to play with. So thank you so much for that question. And again, for your service and the service that you're providing to all your patients. Thank you so much. And I wish you really well.
And thank you, Rena. Thank you. Thank you for your heart and compassion, both of you. Thank you.
Right. So our next question comes from David Harrison. David, we've got on the line. He's a retired NHS. Oh, hello, David. NHS biomedical scientist and former head of pathology. So David, I can see that you're already online. Feel free to chime in and ask your question. Welcome.
Hello, John. It's an honor to see you. I was a late convert to mindfulness. My wife suffered chronic pain, and I sat for days and weeks and months and years listening to you, and I didn't get it. But it was the welcoming bit, welcoming pain, put out the doormat. But that's just a little bit of history. But my question is the concerns about the mental health being suffered by my colleagues. They're suffering so much. I mean, I was in the health service for over 40 years and I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah.
And they're suffering from fear, from anxiety, from stress, but also grief. And some of the workers are acting like surrogate parents to the patients, more than ever I've ever seen. And it's just that I'm a great believer that mindfulness can help with this, along, with maybe other counselling techniques. But
of course.
And I understand the process, and I understand the end bit. It's how do you start? You sit down with somebody who's suffering all these mixed emotions, and you want to help them, but how do you start the process to get them into mindfulness?
There's no one right way. I mean, and you have to trust your instincts. Maybe you start, in the old days, you would start with a hug, maybe.
Oh, I'm a Yorkshire man and I can't hug. That's causing me trauma.
Yeah, well, that's causing a lot of people trauma. So the short answer is you start where you are and any way you can. What people most need, and think for yourself, I mean, what makes you feel absolutely at your best? Is it not when you feel seen, heard, and recognized and accepted by another human being? There's something so fundamental in that sense of connection, recognition, and acceptance without judgment that is absolutely huge. No words need to be exchanged even. When your heart is open, everybody else feels it because you're embodying what you want the other person to have. And if you're not doing it as some kind of contrivance, some kind of act, which of course is sadly too often happens, is that it's kind of becomes puppetized or whatever, scripted. But when it's simply authentically you being you, then it's like water. It will flow downhill and obstacles are not a problem because if it doesn't go one way, it'll find another way. And so there it requires us to trust our own human creativity rather than to kind of run some kind of trauma script. I'm not saying the trauma scripts are not important. They're incredibly important. But sometimes you can't get the right person at the right time to see the right person at the right time. So we're like the front lines, we do what we can. And what people remember most is that you were there and you were human, and not what you said. So again, the meditation practice is in complete alignment with that, because it's saying you're already whole, you're already complete. There's nothing missing, even in the face of all this horror. To simply hold that in awareness with kindness and hold the other person. That could be an embrace, a virtual embrace if it has to be. Just the same way as I feel like you and I are communicating, you are merely a two-dimensional face on a screen on my laptop. We've never met, we probably never will meet, but because of the technology, we're in some kind of digital universe where I'm making you real, you're making me real, and we can have actual effects on each other. So when you are with another patient, whether or a colleague, whether it's online, because a lot of what has to happen online nowadays, or ultimately in person when we get back to some semblance of normal, which may never be the normal of the past, then we're discovering new ways to actually connect in ways that are healing. And no one has the inside track on how to do this. And techniques, if they're mechanically offered, wind up just being mechanisms and mechanics. And then we feel the emptiness of that because the person is doing something to us rather than being with us. It makes a huge difference. I don't know if that speaks to what you're asking.
It does, because it's that, in a way, genuineness of you being you being grounded. And as you're talking to somebody else on a mindfulness level, is that will come through. If you believe, they will start to believe.
Yeah,
And I'm
except
sure.
let's not go with belief, because
Mm.
then that kind of makes it into a catechism where you have to believe the new mindfulness catechism. There is no mindfulness catechism. It's not a religion. It's not a belief. It's pure awareness.
Mm.
Okay,
Yes.
it's pure
Yeah.
awareness, but awareness is not some cold, clinical, divorced from reality kind of abstraction. It's like deep connectivity. So I see my humanity in you while you're seeing your humanity in me. And there's something about that that is quite mysterious, but absolutely fundamental to our well-being, because
Mm.
recognition and belonging are the most important things to being human because of our tribal origins, and before tribal, just our, Bronze Age and prehistoric origins. I mean, in units where our lives depended on each other in ways that were like, just like now.
Yeah. I mean, science has held me back for a long time.
Yeah, it's one of those
but I
funny
understand what you're
things where
saying.
it's its own beautiful universe,
Mm.
but it's not the full story.
No, I
Because
found that out later in life.
we now live in an era of multiverses. So
Mm.
you have to be willing to draw on different universes like art, as well as science, music, individualism, and also this kind of larger ecological, deep uh, connected, I don't know what to call it, but connectivism,
Mm.
or the recognition that we're all totally interconnected.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Thank you.
going back to breathing and what Rena said about breathing, it's actually a conspiracy, you could say, but in the best possible senses, because the word conspiracy means breathing together.
Mm. I
Mm.
tell everybody to learn how to breathe properly. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, David, for that question. And I'm sure that the answer that John has sort of directed us towards, the embodiment of who you truly are, and then what being sort of showing up from that space and really truly seeing, hearing, recognizing, appreciating both ourselves and the other person can really be a great way into this as we do begin to work with colleagues who might be going through the mental health challenges and the PTSD that comes from this. So thank you for your question, and I wish you well. Thank you for coming online.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so John, we have just a few minutes now to wrap up, and I would invite you to share your sort of words and thoughts before we wrap up the call.
Well, it's been very gratifying to be with you all today. And I just want to remind you that this is the start of an entire unfolding that's going to happen over the next couple of months. Many of the presenters are people that I've known for decades. You're going to be in very good hands. The people who organize this gathering, or whatever we call these kinds of things that happen online, they are not trying to sell you anything. This is not some new age gimmick or some, like, you know, post-apocalyptic solution to the pandemic or anything else. Mindfulness is as old as humanity. It predates Buddhism. Awareness doesn't have a kind of country signature or religious signature or a scientific signature. It's an element of our humanity that's actually baked in from the very beginning. And it may be the critical factor in whether we can actually rein in and modulate our tendencies to put ourselves before everybody else, and then be driven by what classically people call greed, self-centered self-interest, hatred, like othering those that are not like me or whoever's the cause of my problems. And often, you know, sort of that leads to horrible consequences in history. And delusion, like just sort of like being clueless about your own true nature. And what we can do with our capacity to pay attention and to cultivate mindfulness, or moment-to-moment awareness, not moment-to-moment non-judgmental awareness, doesn't mean we won't have judgments. It means that we'll be aware of how judgmental we are and then not get caught in those dualisms. That I see this as a kind of evolutionary option for humans, that we're at a kind of branch point, cosmologically speaking, in terms of humanity, and there are an awful lot of different ways that things could go. And if we wanted to go in the direction that maximizes, optimizes well-being and health and healing, and a recognition of the wholeness of humanity, including humans that don't look like me, and we want to minimize our own intrinsic aggression and violence and forms of anger and hatred that are, you know, also a kind of inheritance from earlier era when there were far fewer people on the planet. And if they were other people from some other group, then they were potentially dangerous to us, and we had to be on the lookout for that. But now, with 7 billion plus people on the planet, and the virus not caring who we are, what country we live in, what color our skin is, or anything like that, except that it is much more harmful to people who do not have resources, who have not had the privileges that many people in this society have, for one reason or another, the injustices that are baked into poverty and various kinds of capitalist institutions that privilege the few over the many. This is a moment on the planet where we could actually maybe get the message instead of deny the messenger and just want to put it all behind us and then forget. because there will be another pandemic. There is global warming. There is poverty and injustice and disease and dis-ease in the society. Maybe this is just the moment where we need to recognize we have resources. Can we utilize our resources to take care of what needs taken care of? And not all have the same ideas about what needs taken care of, but to have the conversation in a way that, again, is ethical, that optimizes well-being, minimizes harm, for the benefit of not just our generation, but future generations. And our children will look at us. I have children, I have grandchildren, and I'm sure many of you do. Our children are going to look back on this generation, and they're going to really hold us into account for what we did or didn't do in this era, because they're going to feel it in ways that are unthinkable. And to whatever degree we can, we need to take responsibility for righting the playing field, so to speak. And
Thank
I have every confidence that we can do that. And that's what mindfulness is really about. It's not about, again, some little meditative engagement. It's living your life as if it really, really, really mattered in the only time any of us ever get. And that's this moment.
Thank you so much, John. And I'm really taking away what you said, that mindfulness is living our lives moment to moment, whatever is arising.
Yeah.
And really trying to hold on to that personally. And I'm sure that many of our listeners who are listening to this now and later will have their own key takeaways. But yeah, just taking this, taking away this common humanity element, taking away the accountability element, and really using all of this to create and co-create a better future based on how I'm being now.
Beautifully said.
Now.
Beautifully said. And that the last word, I guess, that I would say is that a lot of the time we don't feel so good about ourselves, and we can muster all sorts of narratives about where we're off or what we didn't do that we should have done, or, things that we regret. But, that's a narrative too. And then when we are missing our own beauty, it's a form of violence that we perpetrate on ourselves and then project onto the rest of the world. That's the real cause of why I'm not sufficient. And so the last thing I would say is, like, you are trustworthy if you're willing to trust your own experience, starting with your breath, but more important, because the breath is just an object of attention, the attending itself, the awarenessing, so to function, so to speak. So play with it, experiment with it in all moments of life, 24/7, and see whether that kind of refuge doesn't actually become not just a out of the wind sheltering place, but a place to stand where you can actually face the winds of change, opportunity, and horror, and do what needs doing in a way that comes out of being. And I think you'll find that it's trustworthy.
I love that.
So I may not be trustworthy, but you are definitely trustworthy.
You are most certainly trustworthy, and thank you so much for inspiring us, especially at a time like this, and sharing your insights and your deep wisdom. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Rena, for holding the space in the way that you have. I mean, I've done a lot of these kinds of things in the past, and the deep listening that you sort of effortlessly engage in, so that we're not like two voices trying to sort of find some common ground, but actually different aspects of the same emerging intentionality. It's really been my pleasure to be with you and with Barry and with your whole team behind it, because this stuff it may seem like it just comes out of nowhere, but it actually, I know that there's a lot of work involved in developing this whole program. And I do want to say that the people who are going to be following me, it's a little bit like I have small grandchildren, so every once in a while I read the Three Billy Goats gruff, but I'm like the first Billy Goat in this series, but you should see what's coming.
And I'm so happy that you're highlighting this, because we are so excited. and inspired to bring this whole series. And so we're going to be back next week, next Friday, with Dr. Zev Schumann-Olivier from the Harvard Medical School. Zev is a visionary leader and a practitioner, and I'm really looking forward to hearing his perspectives on all of this. So with that, my friends, just want to say thank you again for tuning in and for your energy. We certainly felt that on the call, both John and I. And yeah, stay safe and stay well. And again, thank you for your service to humanity at this time. And with that, I'll pass it on to Barry.
So from mindful.org and the Awake Network, thank you so much, John. And thank you, Rena. And thanks to all of you participants for joining, both live now and in the future now. This has been a wonderful exploration of how to rouse resilience for ourselves and collectively. We look forward to seeing you in future sessions. Thank you and bye-bye.